Welcome to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast where innovation isn't just an ideal, it's a way of life. I'm your host and creator of the Innovate, Disrupt, or Die newsletter, Danny Nathan. Hello, folks, and welcome back to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. This week I have Jeremy Thomas. Jeremy, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
I'm excited to be here, Danny. Thank you very much for hosting and putting this all together.
It is my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation today. So, Jeremy, I'm going to start with the easy question that I ask everybody. Tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, how it relates to innovation, and sort of how you got into this world.
Sure. It's a much longer tale than I'll burden you with in this moment, but I can give you the short version. So
sounds good.
I have a very kind of diverse past. I've done a lot of things, but that started me on this particular journey. I have a background in environmental economics. That was my bachelor's degree and also graduate school study. I went to law school after some jobs and thought I might do environmental law. I graduated in 2008, which was a terrible year to come out of anything,
yes,
but especially law school.
Yes.
All the big firms rescinded offers that summer. It was the first time these things had ever happened. But I happened to be working as an intern at this company called SAP, big software company. I think most people probably kind of know
I think we've heard of it.
And I was fortunate. My boss at the time just said, you know what, I can keep you on as an intern. I'll pay you. You study for the bar. I'll get a conference room and do that for the whole summer. And so I did. And then cut to 8 years later, I had multiple jobs at SAP. I started out on a technical implementation team, which I had no background for. But the really cool thing is that part of the project I went to Germany to the headquarters of SAP, and we had a design thinking workshop to define some of what we were doing in the project. And as we were doing it, we were there for a week. The facilitator pulled me aside at one point and said, hey, you know what? I think you should do this. I think you should be doing more of these things, not as a participant, but actually how do we get you involved in facilitating and kind of driving these kind of discussions? And so over the course of the next 1 to 2 years, my boss allowed me to do it. And then eventually I got transferred to the innovation team. So I was on a global innovation team driving design thinking across SAP's entire ecosystem, including with customers. So I was going and doing design thinking workshops, even teaching customer teams how to do design thinking. The thing about SAP is that the co-founder, Hasso Plattner, I don't know if you know him or not, but co-founded SAP, but also the Stanford D School and the big D School in Berlin happened to be named after Hasso Plattner. So SAP had a very strong DNA in design thinking, partnerships with Stanford. I was working in Palo Alto, and also IDEO, of course, is there, and they also work together with IDEO. So it's really cool that I got to kind of build this relationship through SAP. At some point, I realized after talking with a lot of executives as I was doing these projects that I could do better if I was kind of independent. So I did that. I left in 2014, did it basically up until COVID. COVID blew that out of the water because I always felt like I really needed to be on site for these kind of things and not do Zoom. So while COVID was happening, I really started pulling all my experiences together and said, you know what, I really believe that we're heading in the wrong direction. Our extractive economies are destroying the planet. Our innovation is also continuing that same narrative, that same process. I'm going to spin this and become a regenerative innovation specialist. And so I started for 2 years. I researched and looked at companies that were already starting their own journey, kind of getting up a baseline. What are they doing? How are they doing it? And then just in the last, say, 6 months or so, I've been building out the assets to support it, trying to make it easy for someone to do, because it is sometimes a big topic. And I want it to be like the design thinking tools that I used when I learned to do design thinking.
Sure.
So I've developed that stuff, and now I'm kind of at the precipice of not only being kind of the person thinking and talking about it, but actually, how can I help you do it? And that's where I am.
Awesome. That's a great rundown. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. So you sort of dropped the big bomb here, Jeremy, the idea of regenerative innovation. What is regenerative innovation? How is it different from yield regular innovation? And how does our thinking need to change?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I wish that I could give you just this perfect answer. But of course, as is anything in innovation, it's not as easy as that. But I would say, so there's a quote from Maya Angelou. She says, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. We know better. We know that our economy is extractive. Innovation is continuing that extraction, most innovation. And if we don't change it, what innovation actually will do is will just help us accelerate that extraction. And so what my idea is that, part of the problem with a lot of innovation is it's human centered, design thinking, human centric design, business model, canvas, all those things are all about personas. The personas are almost always people.
Mm-hmm.
What we need is kind of to have a new lens and to say, how do I inspire a person to not be selfish in their innovation and actually think about the other parts of what supports our planet? And we depend on the planet for everything, right?
Yes.
So regenerative innovation, to me, the biggest part of it is how do I create a new lens to help people get out of their own minds and not empathize with another person, a customer or a stakeholder, but empathize with our planet. How do we empathize and see that? And so that's what I've been trying to accomplish. And I think that's the biggest difference. You can use the same tools. You can still do basically design thinking. You can still do business model canvas. You can still do MVPs.
Mm-hmm.
It's the lens that you're looking at it from that's changing. And so that's really what I've worked on the most.
Interesting. I want to back up and hit on a couple of things in there, Jeremy. When you say extractive, and contextually, I understand what you mean by that,
Sure.
but I'm going to ask you to explain it anyway, just so that we can put a fine point on it for the purpose of conversation here.
Sure. So, the easy ones are like oil and gas, coal. We literally extract out of the earth the stuff. And yes, you could make an argument that's renewable because it will eventually renew, but these things take millions and billions of years. So it's not renewable to us. It's renewable to the planet. But so the best example of extraction is that.
You characterize regenerative innovation as sort of keeping the planet in mind as opposed to making it human-centered. Isn't there an argument to be made, though, that is entirely human-centric? I mean, when you look at it through the lens of if we don't protect the planet, then we're going to destroy ourselves, then it's one of those weird things that we know is in our best interest and yet is still incredibly difficult because it takes a mass of people to commit to doing so.
Yes. Yeah, no, and I think the kind of the tension that lies there that you're drawing out is we tend to act, even though it is in our interest, and you're right, it's still human centered. We're trying to save ourselves, right? This is what we're doing. But we as a species, and especially in what we do for work and the businesses and organizations and governments we build, are very short-sighted. And so we tend, when we do those human-centered things, to not be able to get far enough out into the future. We're thinking only about next quarter, next month, next week. And so I think that transition that needs to happen is that we need to have some way to allow us to see where our species fits longer term, balanced with the other things that are important to the planet, right? So I think that's where that's where I'm trying to go with regenerative innovation.
Interesting. So are you sort of originating the idea of regenerative innovation? I have to admit, I hadn't heard of it until you and I spoke, but then you nodded it to some other companies you were researching.
Yeah, no, I would love to say that I'm the first person to do anything about regenerative innovation, but that's not true. There are other folks who work within the regenerative innovation space. I have a different tack. I took kind of the business model canvas approach and said, I want this to be tactical. I worked in innovation using these tools. What if I created the same sort of thing, but for regenerative innovation? And so that is something that is not being done.
Fair enough. You still get credit from me because I hadn't heard of it before. Help me understand, maybe just through an example or two, what does regenerative innovation look like when it's put into place, and how is it differentiated from say, a focus on sustainability, which of course has been part of the lexicon for quite some time now.
Yeah. So basically the way that I've kind of set it up is that it's multi-tiered. So the highest level of what I've been working on to create is basically a holistic planetary framework. I've delineated 6 categories that make up any living organism's needs from our planet, right?
Okay.
So if you look at the first one is called habitat and living systems. So that's basically, what are the physical spaces, ecosystems, and processes that we would need to survive? And that could be a human, but that could also be a bird, a microorganism, a tree, a whale in the ocean, whatever it is. We all have a need for some sort of habitat and living systems. So that's the first category of what every organism needs. The second would be looking at it from the perspective of food, water, and nutrients and how they cycle, and making sure that we protect those sorts of things so that it's really able to support the life that has been created in those habitats. To support that particular category, we also need to make sure that the climate and energy balance, so how that all flows through the atmosphere and the geography and geology of the planet, that also has to be a part of supporting both the habitats and also the food systems that we need. All of that supports a really critical thing that I think doesn't get nearly enough attention, and that's biodiversity. Biodiversity is so critical for so many things, but the biggest one is providing resilience and health of our overall systems and planet. And that's both human health and planetary health. If we don't
Sure.
maintain biodiversity, we're in really big trouble. The fifth category is looking at knowledge, innovation, and evolution. So what's that intersection? And I think this one is really kind of a cool category, but what's that intersection between what we've learned and what the kind of planetary wisdom of knowledge of things that have grown to this point, how we can apply that, how evolution has created the circumstances that we live in, and quite honestly, that we depend on to survive as a species as well as other species. And really, like, how do we kind of learn from that, but also use it as a frame for connecting all of the other pieces within the framework. The final part, I call it the human and more than human players. So
Okay.
they're personas to a certain extent because they are the players that are in there, and we could divine them out as personas. But more important, they're also critical to the systems. It's, if you think about things like keystone species or the support species that feed the keystone species, they're all not only personas, they're also participants that are in the
Sure.
entire system, right? So that fifth category kind of weaves all the other ones together, because these are the organisms and the personas that need to be supported as we go through the process. So that's kind of the high level tier 1. I'll stop there before I go to tier 2 to see if there's anything you want to kind of talk about. And
Yes,
okay,
there
sure.
is.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
So it sounds like regenerative innovation then is primarily grounded in innovation that helps the planet and our ecosystems and all of the diversity of beings
Hmm.
within.
Right.
Where is the intersection of that with business in your
Yeah.
world?
Yeah. So when I come down, we'll go down 2 layers, right? So that was the holistic framework with the categories. The next one down would be, I've created what I'm calling regenerative archetypes. So the regenerative archetypes are kind of those new lenses. So when I think about habitat and living systems, the archetype is kind of like the spirit guide, right? For that category. It's not a person,
Okay.
but it's the spirit guide that says, hey, I've got a business and I'm operating, and I want to think about how I interact with habitats and living systems. And so now I can look at this archetype and it can inspire me to ask the right questions. So I actually have guiding questions within the framework that can say, okay, well, how does my supply chain affect the rainforest in the Amazon because I'm raising beef, for example? And
Right.
you can start to have that kind of discussion, right? So that's that layer. But really, the more important layer is below that. I have also a scoring methodology. So I've actually created kind of the Yelp score for regenerativeness of your company. So
Okay.
it goes from 1, you're still extractive, linear, traditional, to 5, you're a regenerative business.
Okay.
And I have the scoring is set up so that I have business measures within each category that map to the 6 planetary categories, right? So when you get a score, I can tell you where those things are within the 6 categories. This is based
Okay.
on your business, right? Not on high level environmental and eco stuff, but I analyze your business. I look at your supply chain, your financials, your transportation and logistics, all those things, and give you a score. You're a sustainable business, which is a 3, right? So if you're a 3, that means you still have room to go to 4, which is
Yeah, you're
restorative,
right smack in the.
and 5, which is regenerative, right? So the last part of that, after I can do the scoring, is that we can then create a transformation pathway. So tactically, what can your business do to continue your journey up the scale of regenerative, right? So I give you this kind of transformation pathway, but it's not the answer. Then that feeds back up to the archetypes and the categories, and we can see where do you need to transform, go back to that and get inspired by the archetype to say,
Mhm.
how can I do better and change my score so that I can be more regenerative?
Interesting. Jeremy, how many examples have you run through this system?
So I have probably about 10 that I've run through.
Okay.
I am currently working on a few case study ones that would
Hmm.
be a part of releasing. I'm also writing this up as a book, kind of like the business model generation, so that you'd have
Sure.
kind of that tactical, how do I go through? So I'm currently working with some companies that are already on the pathway. I focused on ones that are kind of trending regenerative already, right?
Sure.
Because
You
I
need the
want to say,
exemplars to help
yeah,
people.
here's what they're
Yeah.
doing. So I have about 3 or 4 of those that I'm currently working with.
Got it. Sorry, I didn't mean to pry, Jeremy. The reason I was
No, no, it's great.
asking, the reason I'm asking how many companies you run through it is I can sort of envision a world where as you gain more visibility and experience and have run more examples through the evaluation framework, that you could begin to sort of categorize types of companies that are more easily regenerative or that
Yes.
are, like the underlying question was, do you see certain types of companies that are more quickly on the path to becoming regenerative, or that you see an ease of transition or transformation for, I'm envisioning oil and gas companies, for example, being relatively low on the scale and
Yes, yes.
perhaps resistant to change, whereas,
Really? They're
companies that
resistant?
are so,
Yeah, no, I think
interesting.
it's a great question and a great point. So, yes, I do think there are, you know, we can call it whatever it is, industries, lines of business, or categories of companies that are easier, or are more set to transform to regenerative. And I can tell you from my early work that the primary place you see it is in agriculture and food,
Sure.
because they're working, you know, there's a, so there is a distinction I want to make. So when I talk about regenerative innovation, my focus is on how do we build regenerative businesses? And then how
Okay.
do we use that to create a regenerative economy so that we can live in parallel with our planet, right? So that
Hmm.
we don't have all these terrible problems. In agriculture, there's a huge push to be regenerative in the farm, and there are also other places where people are building regenerative products. And that's great, but a regenerative product doesn't make you a regenerative business, right? So,
What would give me an example of a regenerative product, Jeremy?
okay,
Like what
so
what does that look like as opposed to
yeah.
business?
So there are a couple great companies. I wear their clothes. Woolly, which is a company in Seattle, and they make all their clothing from wool.
Okay.
On their website, it says, let's eliminate plastics forever. So they don't use any polyesters or any of the fossil fuel derivative fabrics. And their clothes are, in fact, regenerative. At the end of their life, they can be hopefully reused, recycled a little bit, but ultimately they can be put back into the earth because they are a natural product, right? They're made from
Got
wood,
it. So
right?
theoretically, at the end of its life cycle, it could be composted, for example.
Yes, 100%, right? So that's one example. There's also a lot of packaging right now that's working on being more compostable, which is, I think, akin to regenerative. I wouldn't call it regenerative yet. I think we still need a couple more steps of composting is great, but are we actually doing like the thing that needs to happen with compost, which is to regenerate the earth? It's fine that we can break it down, but are we actually doing?
Yeah, are we putting it where it needs to go to make
Yeah, are we replacing what we took out? Right. This is the ultimate question. So there are products out there that are coming along the way that are regenerative. Many of them, though, still have business models that are not regenerative. So they're still shipping, across the world. They're still using it in their supply chains, and that's where, if you want to be a regenerative business, we're going to look at your whole business model, not just I created some products that are regenerative, right? Right.
Okay, that kind of gets to I guess in a way that gets to the heart of the matter that comes to my mind, Jeremy. Like, business is really hard, and innovation is really hard.
Really hard.
And now you want to add the layer of, not only do I need to create a sustainable business, and I need to figure out how to innovate on that business to create longevity so that it sticks around for a while, but now I need to also be regeneratively innovative and think about all of the sort of upstream and downstream impacts. I can envision it becoming just one thing too many for a lot of business owners. How do you address that, and how do you help them overcome that mindset and encourage them then to consider, hey, it's great that you're using all natural materials, but the fact that you're shipping it halfway around the world doesn't help?
Right. It's a journey. I mean, and it's going to continue to be a journey. I would change right at the very beginning that you said, I want them to do this. That's not the right framing. The framing is, we have to do this. And either we have to do it voluntarily and start looking at the opportunity positively of how we can transform what we do and how we use this planet, or eventually the planet will make us do it. And that will not be pretty. A lot of companies understand this, and a lot of companies are already trying to do what they can. What they're missing is how to do it. And that's where I'm trying to come in and say, I can give you a tactical approach to it. It requires a shifting of your mindset. It requires a shifting of your business model. And it's a lot to think about, but it's something that's so critically important for the future that I think once it's going to be really hard to overcome, especially the bigger companies, for a little while. They're entrenched and they're beholden to their investors. And until we change that, it's going to be really hard for them to really push regenerative. But I think once we get some transition and show how this works and how it can be in alignment with the planet, I think it will accelerate faster, partially because we're also accelerating faster in the problems we're having.
Right.
In climate and biodiversity and natural disasters and all those things that we have caused to happen to this planet. So I think we're seeing those two things kind of coming to a point where more and more will be willing to go in the direction of saying, yeah, no, we need to change the way we think about business. And I really believe that there's a lot of hope, but you're right to point out, this is going to be a difficult journey. We're not going to get there overnight, but one of the biggest things I believe we need are the tools. Because if we don't give people tools, then we're just talking in big words and we're saying big things that require change, but no one's doing anything about it.
Right.
And I want us to
that's
do
a great
stuff.
point.
Right. Yeah.
Jeremy, do you believe that it is possible to run a business regeneratively with either a neutral or a positive impact on the financials of that business?
I think if we redefine what we mean by the financials and impacts, yes. If you really want to think about the tension that we have, it's that we are turning our planetary resources into cash, which sits in certain people's pockets and bank accounts instead of being put back into the planet, right? So
yes, absolutely. And I think that's a great point, though.
So we have to do something about that. Right now, we're not there, right? They still have all the cash. and the planet is
Yes.
still depleted.
So how do you reconcile that, Jeremy? And
So
I don't expect you to have
sure,
like, the magic bullet to solve the world's capitalist problems here.
right,
But given what you're putting forward in terms of, and I appreciate the reframing that you pointed out a moment ago, that it's not I want or you want, it's we need.
yes,
What we have proven to ourselves over time is that one powerful, wealthy person who wants to focus here instead of here can have massive impact on our collective ability to change things for the better. So,
right,
how do you overcome that moment of, without naming names, the people who are in power and the people who
yes,
are controlling the large companies that have both the greatest opportunity to make an impact, but also the least incentive? Like,
right.
how do you get them on board?
Yeah, no, I think this is going to be a difficult thing. So number one, they like to pretend they're on board, right?
Yes.
So throw some cash into a fund that's to fight these things while spending 98% of their cash
Right.
on the stuff that hurts the planet, right? So there's a lot of in name only. But I will say that I do hear more and more about those very same people really understanding that at this moment they need to do more with their money. So there are, and to put a term on it, let's say billionaires. There are
Sure.
billionaires who are looking to help transform the way we see this. They understand that what they have done to create their wealth has had a negative impact on culture, on society, on people, on the planet, right? It's hard to ignore, I think, for most of them at some point. So they're there, and that's part of the transition. More importantly, I think we have to show the way. There are structures for companies that are more regenerative. So right now, I'm not transitioning quite yet, but I am rewriting my incorporation documents to be more modeled like a co-op. People hear that, and I don't know why there's such a negative connotation for it. It's in fact the most democratic way to run anything because everyone who is a member gets to vote on everything,
Right.
right?
Right.
You're not a shareholder just with the cash, but you're actually making decisions for everything the company does. You also share in everything the company does, right? So I think there's a way to model that and to show, hey, you know what, we can create structures that can still be, and I'm going to use the word prosperous instead of profitable. They can still be
Sure.
prosperous for all the people involved without damaging the planet, right? Because you're making these decisions together. As
See
long as
that
we,
I love that, Jeremy. I'm sorry to cut you off,
no,
but
it's okay. It's okay.
I'm jumping in because what you have just defined is interestingly a corporate structure that enables the voice of many to sort of shine through
Right.
and removes some of the centralized power that we see coming from people who run very large,
Yeah.
very popular businesses.
Yes.
And so that's a really interesting solution. As you're describing all of this, Jeremy, there's a couple of things that have come to mind. One, like, is the evaluation framework that you're creating and the kind of 1 to 5 scoring system, is that going to be something that requires help from you or somebody like you to evaluate? Or is there a world where that becomes a self-assessment so that the barrier to entry becomes lower?
I've thought about this a lot. And the honest answer is that as I see it, the future is that it needs to be democratic, right? A regenerative business does not hold itself separate from the work that it's doing. So I would very much want to have that scoring methodology and the entire regenerative innovation methodology that I create usable by anyone, right?
Got it.
That's the ultimate goal. I think to get there though, there are two things that have to happen is that early on there is going to have to be a lot of involvement from myself and from people that I work with to create the standard, right? Because
Sure.
you could very easily take the methodology and if you answered it the way you wanted to answer it, you could say that you scored a 5
Right.
by not really being fully honest about your answers or not necessarily dishonest, but just not portraying everything that might be there, right? So there's room for regenerative washing to coin
Yes.
a term, right?
Yes.
And we don't want that. We want it to be rigorous and there. And the same with applying the methodology. It's like, it's fine. I want people to use it, and I'm going to share, what I release in the next weeks and months as I bring the methodology out for people to see and interact with. But ultimately, the same as with design thinking, you
I was,
probably
yeah,
need a little training if you're going
yeah,
to try to do it, right?
yeah. And I was just thinking that. I mean, what you're describing sounds like the moment when design thinking became a thing. And,
Yeah.
IDEO, for example, was one of the practitioners of, and
Yes.
one of the first places you turned to learn how to do it. But eventually people do learn how to apply that thinking and reach a point where they can do so without a facilitator, for lack of a better
Yeah.
term.
The other reasons that I ventured out on my own was because people started to look at design thinking and leverage design thinking as kind of this process methodology, follow the recipe to get innovation. And I never believed in that. Never. And I just couldn't bring myself to continue to be in a place that wanted it to be a process. It's like, no, but it's not a process. It's, if you don't have the right mindset and the right
Yes.
ability to fail and to learn and to push boundaries, then what are we doing here?
The other question that comes to mind, Jeremy, is: are you engaging with government at all? It sounds like there's an opportunity there
Mhm.
for uh, not only things like grant programs or things like that to
Yeah.
support the effort towards becoming regenerative, but then also in success, I can see a world where companies that are demonstrably regenerative are rewarded for it, literally
Right.
financially. And it seems like there'd be an opportunity to partner, perhaps even just at the local level to start with, but to get some of those programs in place and to expose them to the type of thinking that you're sharing so that you can craft those relationships and those opportunities early on.
I have started some discussions with some local organizations. I also foresee kind of in this co-op structure that what I want to have is, I don't know the best term for it yet, but as a board of advisors, I want to have people who are regeneratively minded. So either they're involved in it or they want to be involved in it. And it's more of a guidance than it is the traditional board of directors or board of advisors
Right.
kind of thing. So I'm working on building something like that. Kind of like 2008 when I graduated from law school, not the best time to come out of law school. Also, rolling out regenerative innovation in 2025, not the best time to be sustainable and regenerative for a lot of our government programs. Some of them have
Yes.
disappeared wholly,
On the other hand, though, it
but I live in
does.
California, so I do have some advantage. And that's what I mean,
Yeah.
that I do have that because more will happen here now because it's
Yes.
not happening at the
At the
federal
federal
level,
level.
right?
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing is, I think that the changes to which you are nodding are also creating an environment of awareness for the people who do want to pursue it. And
Yeah.
so, while
Yeah.
I understand your point of the challenges that the current administration might bring to what you're aiming for, it also then allows sort of the grassroots side of things to take.
Right. Right. And I think that's ultimately, that's the most regenerative approach, is that it comes from the grassroots. But not to discount, we need to get those billionaires on board and start
Yes.
transferring some of what they've extracted and exploited back into
Yeah.
being regenerative and restorative.
Yeah.
And, I have, there are also some great companies who are doing work like removing plastic from the ocean, these kind of things. And those are great. They're not regenerative, but they're absolutely critical because what they're doing is restoring what we've already messed up, right? So that's
Sure.
a big part of the story. What I want to do is focus on them to say, because they have partnerships with companies who want to offset their
Yes.
activities. And then they're going to recommend to you that instead of offsetting, we actually try to change your
Right. We take
source,
it a step further.
right? Because I don't want to keep cleaning up the plastic you keep making,
Right.
because that's what we're doing. It's like, oh, I'm
Right.
offsetting every bottle that I make. It's like, well, that bottle is going to be on the
Yeah.
beach.
Stop making them.
Stop
Jeez.
making them. So
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
want to use this regenerative innovation to change that entire idea and push the limits. Okay, so let's restore, let's pay for it. Companies are already doing it. But what I need on the backside is to say, and you know what? Let's also take it one little step farther and rethink what you're doing upstream, right? Instead of looking downstream.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeremy, this is Absolutely fascinating, and I applaud your efforts to the fullest. I do not envy the uphill battle that you have
Yeah,
ahead of
yeah.
you, but I do appreciate that there are people like you out there that are fighting it.
Well, I think that, just to say it to you and to the other people that you talk to, I mean, if we, the innovators, are not the ones that are going to do this, then
Who
who
is?
is? And
Yeah.
and we all have this mindset. It's there. We all know that innovation requires change and creating new things. This is really new, but it's also really old because we used to live in a way that was more in tune. And so we can learn lessons from the past, apply it in the ways that we can, leveraging tools like AI and those things to create a regenerative future. And I'm hoping that, the first group of people that really get excited about what I'm doing are people like you and other innovators to say, look, I'd like to adopt some of this.
Yes, absolutely. And Jeremy, you've mentioned tools a moment ago to sort of tease it out. You do have a new
Yeah.
tool coming out in
Yeah.
the very near future from our conversation, right? Is there anything you'd like to share about that, or is it a little too soon?
I mentioned earlier the holistic planetary framework. So the first release of the different tiers that I've talked about earlier is going to be the innovation canvas. So that's basically going to give you the 6 planetary categories that I talked about earlier in the framework that we have and kind of a description of what they are. And then next will be coming the archetypes so that you can start to understand how they interact with business and with the categories. And then the scoring methodology will be following that. So over probably the next 2 or 3 months, those all will come out. And then hopefully by the end of, as we approach the holidays, hopefully the book also will be close to rolling out. I've got a lot of it written, but it will be a great how-to guide that will also supply the tools and how to use them. So
Fantastic. And Jeremy, if somebody happens to listen to this and says, geez, I want to do that for my business, where can they find you? Where can they learn more? What's the best way to reach you?
yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is always a great spot. I post a lot from my own LinkedIn, Jeremy C. Thomas. Karam, my company, also has a page. So that's always a great place to connect. Also, www.karam.com is my website. You can join, follow, and receive the weekly newsletter update of the new blogs and that kind of stuff. And also the release of any of the tools and skills that I have upcoming.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing them, Jeremy. It sounds like
Yeah.
a really necessary endeavor.
Yeah,
So,
no,
as I said, I applaud you greatly for it. Thanks so much for joining us, Jeremy. I'm really looking forward to seeing the tools come out and looking forward to seeing how people receive the idea of regenerative innovation.
thank you very much. I enjoyed the discussion, and please, we can continue the discussion in another one in the future.
I look forward to it. Absolutely.
Great. Thanks,
Awesome.
Danny.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. Join us again for our next episode, and don't forget to subscribe at innovatedisruptordie.com. That's all, folks.